Take off his background as well. Because with two people, the background sometimes doesn't work. Okay. Hello, hello.
Still got a bit of it.
Oh, okay.
Good morning.
Hey, hey.
Hello.
Hello. We'll give people a minute or two to join. You're welcome to say hi, whatever you want to in the meantime. Hi, Robert.
Hello, good morning.
Let
Good
me just
afternoon,
see.
good
For
evening.
some reason, my speaker's not working. So,
I'm off mute.
right.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon, Peter.
I found the problem. My volume was at 0. Okay, we'll give people one more minute.
Welcome home, Sharon.
I wanted to say something, but our dogs are barking like, oh my gosh. I'm sorry I missed the conference yesterday. I was registered, but we had somewhere else to go, and I can't wait for the recording to come out.
Yes,
Bet it was great.
it was some really good contributions there. Yeah. Loved it. And partly what I did there is kind of what we'll touch on some of it today, as well as we kind of introduce some of the process philosophy ideas.
Did y'all have a good turnout at the conference?
I think there were about 55 participants and 5, so maybe 60 altogether.
Good.
As far as I remember. So yeah, that was good.
I think a little more registered. That's the same as Sharon who
Yeah.
didn't make the event.
Yeah, so there were probably more registered and then but decided to wait for the video. It was an awkward time for us. It was between 8 and 12 o'clock at night, or maybe a bit later. So I kind of checked out by 11. Yeah. Okay. I think we've got it's far enough to get going. Yeah. Wonder, I might maybe I'll start off by just reading a little piece that I've written, because I don't want to miss out on some of the ideas I want to share. And then I'll just speak a bit after I've read the piece, and then we'll converse further, if that's okay. Okay, so one of my favorite quotes from Alfred North Whitehead is where he says that philosophy begins in wonder, and at the end, when philosophic thought has done its best, the wonder remains. It's such a beautiful attitude to this pursuit of knowledge that produces more than just answers, but rather an appreciation for beauty. So let me read the piece I wanted to. The wonder and intelligibility of our universe are not hidden in abstract theory. Instead, the key that unlocks the wonders is found in the immediacy of experience. And so this was one of Whitehead's approaches to process philosophy that I so enjoy as well, that the goal of this inquiry is not dogmatic certainty, but an enriched experience. And so his very approach begins with saying, we're not going to begin with abstract ideas, which very often philosophy and specifically metaphysics do that. They begin with imagining principles and ideas, and then they subsequently try and apply it to the reality of the world. He had this opposite approach. He said the depth and meaning of your experience is inexhaustible. And if we actually want to understand our world and our universe, we've got to begin there with the concrete reality of your immediate experience. Let me go back. I can't help speaking in between. So experience has a depth of meaning accessible to anyone who approaches it with the awe and the careful observation it deserves. Process philosophy has, let me just quickly let our friends in here. There we go. So process philosophy is an approach that has an inherent reverence to it because it respects the uniqueness, the creativity, and the value of every element of existence. For in every fragment of existence, which includes yourself, the universal logic of what is actual and what is possible finds an embodied form. So this vision of reality sees our universe as a unified verse. The wonder of the enormity of this living cosmos is not diminished in the detail, but exemplified in it. And consequently, every part within this cosmic body is related to every other part and contains a rich history of interaction. So let me kind of also draw a distinction here. One of the approaches to metaphysics that has hugely influenced theology is what we call substance dualism, or it's a substance approach, which is kind of the alternative to this process approach. Now, the substance approach basically begins with saying there are things we can see, they are substances. And then there are activities or movement, things that happens, but all the happenings, all the events, all the activity is really just a product of the things acting. So for them, stuff, substance is the most real part of reality. And I think it was Descartes who kind of defined the essence of that view when he says a substance is something that needs nothing else to exist. It has everything within itself to exist. Now, process philosophy is an alternative approach. So we've already said there's two approaches. We can begin with substances and explain all activity as actions taken by the substances, or we can take the opposite approach. We can begin with activity and explain all substances as the result of dynamic processes. So process philosophy prioritizes activity over substance and change over persistence. And so this doesn't mean that you know, process philosophy denies the existence of substance, but rather that things, substances, are just one type of product of process. I'm going to get to some real practical examples just now, so bear with me. So I already said, like, Descartes defined a substance as something that needs nothing else but itself to exist. And interestingly, you know, he's the guy that said, I think, therefore I am, because he acknowledged that there's something about human consciousness that is a very different substance from the other substances he saw. And so from there developed this whole theory of substance dualism, that, you know, spirit or consciousness or mind is made of one type of thing and the rest of reality is made of other type of thing. And many scientists and philosophers jumped on that and said, okay, that's a big relief for us, because leave us alone to actually look at the real stuff. You know, leave the scientists alone to look at substances. We don't really want to spend much time thinking beyond that. And we leave all the other stuff, you know, consciousness, mind, we leave that to the philosophers and the theologians. So it was an opportunity they took, but it produced a lot of problems, because suddenly you have two different type of substances. You've got the real physical world, and then you've got this other world where the rules don't apply, that applies within the physical world. And I think most of us from a Christian background have grown up with that philosophical system's assumptions, that there are at least two ontological categories. You know, there's two different type of substances. Now, this is where process philosophy brings an enormous advantage, because basically what it says is there's only one type of existence. And when you come to that conclusion, that there's only one category that describes anything that exists, it means that our understanding of reality and our understanding of God becomes consistent with one another. We don't have to have two different stories, two different worldviews, two different experiences, but rather there's one experience, one understanding. Now, it might be very diverse. You know, there's a great amount of difference in the intensification, the complexity, etc., of different experiences, but they all share something in common. So let me go back to what I wanted to read here. So process philosophy disagrees with the substantialist view and redefines substance, or what is real, what is actual, as the coming together of the whole into a microscopic perspective, a distillation of all relationships. So remember, Descartes says that a substance is something that exists, has within itself everything it needs to exist, and relationships are just accidental. They're not really needed for its existence. The process perspective takes the exact opposite view. It basically says that an existent thing requires everything else to exist. Now, the implications there are enormous, because it means that relationship is not something that exists between us, but something that is creative of us. I'm not just in relationship with the rest of the universe, but it is my relationship with the rest of the universe that finds a point of focus, that finds a distillation in my existence. So what is most real within process philosophy is the living movements, its process. For instance, when you look at a flower, you don't just see a form consisting of smaller particles. The flower embodies a history of processes that made it what it appears to be. Now, the other day, I kind of just, somebody sent me a video. I just tuned into a video where, it's the typical kind of view where a scientist hold up an orange and he says, what does this consist of? And then he breaks it down into the molecules, and then he breaks it down into the elements, and he breaks it down into the quarks. And so that view of reality, that any form, we can just take and break it down to its smallest consistence, and we've got everything we need to know about it. And they've done it to the human body. The human body can be kind of broken down to, you've got enough in you to make 25 cakes of soap, and you can, they can use your elements to make some shampoo, some soap, some this, some that, and there you are. You're 80% water. But it's the scientific method of just asking the questions that are easy to answer through counting and measuring. It's very effective if that is the only answers you need. But we mustn't confuse our limitation of our questions with the fullness of reality. Now, it might be true that it's these elements and these minerals that made up the orange, but the very thing that makes the orange more meaningful to me than the same elements in the dirt is the fact that this orange has a history. It has a story that has uniquely caused each of those elements to enter into a relationship with one another that formed this beautiful, nutritious form that has more meaning to me than finding those same elements in the dirt. So this is one of the things that process philosophy kind of focuses in on, is that reality is a flux, it's a movement, it's a process. You don't get to the reality of something by simply asking, what does it consist of in this moment? You get to the reality of something by saying, what is its story? What is the process? And a process reaches both into the past and into the future. The blooming of a flower is something that began somewhere, and there's lots of micro processes, but they are all united in an overarching process that eventually produces an actual value or actual fact, and that is the flower has bloomed. But that fact can't be measured in mechanical time. It can't be measured just in a second, or it's a process, it's a movement. So let me go a bit further. So I'm saying the creative processes are living because they are not just determined by external laws, but animated by an internal responsiveness to possibilities. A process is a coordinated movement of events, a structured series of changes that reaches into both the past and the future by its very nature. The process may consist of many sub-processes. The blooming of a flower has both a history and a future entangled in one overarching process. Okay, so I might carry on with some more ideas, but I think that might be enough to stir a bit of conversation and ideas, because I have, like many other people, grown up with the assumptions of this substance dualism, the spirit world, the physical world. And that change of mind, of understanding reality as one thing, there's been moments of glimpses of insight into what this means, but it has taken many years for the richness and the beauty of that to unfold. Even if we think of yourself or of God, can you conceive of yourself as not a substance, but a process? And what does it mean if we start thinking of God not as a thing, but as a process, a movement? How does this help us with an alternative view that might be enriching or not? But let me stop there and open it up for conversation. And if that's not enough to stir the conversation, I've got a whole another book that I can go through with you. But I want to take it a step at a time. This approach to reality, to see things as not stuff that exists in and by themselves, but as a moment in which the universe has been condensed into a microscopic perspective.
Sarah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everything that you're saying,
We
like
can't
I'm
hear
thinking.
you yet, Sarah.
Oh, can you hear me? No. Move on to someone else.
Move on to someone else. Anyone else? Okay, Robert.
I can
hear
hear
her.
Sarah.
We
I
also
can
can't
hear
hear
her
them.
too.
I think it might be something then to do with us.
Let me quickly, let me check what we heard everyone just now when we started conversing.
I think we changed the mic after that.
Audible, so, there it is. Same system. Can somebody talk again?
Hello.
Oh yeah.
Wonderful. It was
We go back to Sarah first, Robert.
Yeah, no, all that you're saying to me is reminding me of an example of a person, like a human experience that I read this week. And it was the narrative of Sojourner Truth, who, I don't know if you're not familiar with her. She was born in the 1800s, was enslaved as an African American, and so, was denied any kind of theological training, any kind of education, anything like that. But her mom, when she was a little girl, taught her, would take her kids outside and have them look up at the sky. And she taught them about the sky god who always cared for them. And so this was kind of her first introduction to God. So she would pray and see this sky god work, but in her mind, she didn't realize that there would be a God big enough to actually hear her thoughts. So she thought she needed to pray audibly. So I can't remember exactly what happened, but she had kind of this moment of realization where she realized God was everywhere and in everything. And she just said, "Oh, I didn't realize you were so big," and that you could hear, started just recognize, had this huge joy that came over here where she started seeing him, in everything and everyone, even though here she is, she's in bondage. She is experiencing daily just horrific things, and has this experience. Well, she eventually escapes slavery and has become kind of familiar with the Bible. She can't read or write, and so the only way she has heard the stories are from people reading them. And she didn't like it when adults read the stories, because if she'd ask for a segment to be repeated, people would tend to give her explanations. And she said, "I didn't want explanations. I just wanted to hear what the words said so I could make up my own mind." And so she started having children read the scriptures to her, because they would repeat things over and over and not give her any kind of explanation. And so when she heard the story of creation, at first she hears it as a literal story, but she begins to think, well, why would God need to rest after work? I can go for days on end without resting. And why does he need to walk in the cool of the day? I can work in the hottest part of the day. Am I stronger than God? And so she measures that against her experience, her life, like experiencing, seeing God in all of these places. And I just want to read one quote and then I'll stop. But it said she wished to compare the teachings of the Bible with the witness within her, and she came to the conclusion that the Spirit of truth spoke in those records, but that the recorders of those truths had intermingled with them ideas and suppositions of their own. And here's this lady who's had no, theological education is able to make this intelligent leap to say, my experience is a part of all of this, and is able to see. And she was a huge she had such a huge faith in this infinite God that she walked, thousands of miles through her life preaching, and became an integral part of the abolitionist movement to end slavery. And as you're talking about that, that's why I think this is so important, is because what's possible when you start to value what you're saying, your experience and everything that's made you, your relationships, all of the things, it's got so much more to teach you than static information or ideas like that.
Beautiful.
So beautiful.
Wow.
Robert.
Did he just test the mic?
He had his hand up.
Okay.
No, I always have something to say, but I was only trying to get Sarah to let y'all know that we could hear Sarah.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. So beautiful, that moment of realization, that we don't have to distrust those movements that are happening with us, that God's not only speaking out there in a text or book, but that same God is in this moment in the process of speaking in you. And in a sense, that gives it a value that is more relevant and more significant, to be able to tune in to that than to just refer back to what was said a long time ago. Okay.
Mark and Sharon.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of different things, like a sense of belonging, like all encompassing, that we all belong, even the tiniest little micro piece of whatever into the largest piece. We're all belonging and encompassed. And the sense of movement, that even though we're not moving, we're moving. There's movement going. We may not think in our brains that there's something happening, and that, when you talk about the dualistic, that's what I'm trying to work on with myself is I constantly want to try to know what I'm doing, this and that's going to happen. I'm doing this and that's going to happen, rather than just moving within the freedom of doing and being and believing. It's almost like, they say that people who hunt or are in the woods can see things that we cannot see, who don't know. And again, it's almost like an opening of our eyes, letting the scales of whatever we've been brainwashed and formed by, our beliefs, and being able to see reality, as it is, and not measuring, okay, this person lived six months and did not have a good quality of life as someone did at 100 years. Who knows that? This opens up a whole new, very exciting.
Beautiful.
Thanks, Sharon.
Maybe what I'll do, and please, anybody feel free to just put up your hand if you have any questions and want to say or speak any further. But maybe I'll take it a little bit further in an understanding of what this then means about how the world becomes more intelligible. Now, maybe again to emphasize, why is this valuable? There's the order of appreciation and there's the order of explanation. So it's a beautiful example there where, let me give an example. When I was a young child, I started developing an appreciation for art because my granddad was an artist. And, if we go and visit him, we would go into his studio. And I would always enjoy his paintings that were in process more than his finished product. I'm sorry to say, but I don't quite like his style when he finished. But I love looking at the process. And then I remember when I started having a bit of art classes and studying art, and I started looking through the books, the ones that really captured me was like the impressionistic painters like Monet and Cezanne and those guys and post-impressionistic like Van Gogh or Van Gogh, as you would say it. We would say Van Gogh, that's how his mother would have said it. But those paintings awakened an appreciation in me. And that appreciation came without me having all the background or the explanation or the theory behind them. Now, because I then studied art further and went to art school eventually, the explanations came. And the explanations actually deepened my appreciation. So when I started understanding that, You know, the Impressionists lived within a time in which science developed a certain understanding of how light reflects and how we perceive the mixture of light and the wavelengths, and they used those discoveries to suggest certain colors, and instead of painting the color green, they would put a yellow dot and a blue dot next to one another so that you can become a part of this process of mixing it in your mind and seeing green. Isn't that an amazing way in which they said we want the observers to be part of this creative process? So I'm saying all of that to say that your experience has got the depth of meaning and beauty just in that moment, even if you have no explanation. There's that value of appreciation. But the value of entering deeper into an understanding and the intelligibility of our universe is that it can increase your appreciation. It's not that you can't appreciate something without understanding it, but there's certainly an opportunity to appreciate it more with entering into a deeper, intimate knowledge of it. And so let me compare the way in which we approach the intelligibility of our universe between the substance approach and the process approach. Now, the substance approach is kind of the scientific method today. It's very easy. Like I said, they take an orange and we don't have to consider anything else but this orange. We can kind of break it down into its constituent parts and we know what it's made of. We can count and measure. And as I said, it has its place. It has been very successful and productive in many areas. But the problem is when we confuse the limitation of those questions to the fullness of reality. The minerals and the things that the orange are made of is not the fullness of the reality of that orange. There's more to it than those questions. Now we come to the process approach. And the process approach makes many things simpler, but it makes a few things in our explanation a bit harder. For instance, if the whole universe finds a relational congealment, Whitehead uses the word concrescence, and what he means is those relationships become concrete in an actual moment of existence. If the whole universe is connected, then it means when we want to explain anything fully, we actually have to explain everything. And, you know, that's impractical. I can't explain the whole universe when I just want to tell you about an orange. But the fact is that, and that is why there's this perspective that our experience or that moment of existence is inexhaustible. Because in reality, we cannot explain that orange comprehensively. We've got to choose what is it we want to know about this orange, and we can measure and look at the relationships that made those facts possible. Now, I used the example of orange, but we're going to get to your life soon to show that the relevance of that. So I'm talking about what are the difficulties that process philosophy presents us with making our universe intelligible. The first thing is everything's connected. So everything is more complex than just the thing you behold. There's a whole relational history behind it and in front of it that makes it what it is. So we can't have an approach to reality that is oversimplistic. We approach reality with a full appreciation that what it is richer and more amazing than any question I can ask it. So the implication is that the knowledge we glean will always be incomplete, which is not a problem, because we're not searching for dogmatic certainty. What we are pursuing is an enriched appreciation. Isn't that a beautiful approach to our world? That what we want to know of others, of our world, is not, I want to put you in a box and be certain about who and what you are so that I can handle you correctly and manage you correctly from now on. But rather, our approach to one another and to our world is, the reason I want to know more about you is because I want my appreciation of who and what you are to be enriched, because in fact, who and what you are constitutes who and what I am. And my appreciation of you enriches my understanding of myself. And so there's this interconnected reality. So it means that our explanations become a little bit more, it needs to be more considered, because we approach reality with this reverence that it is always deeper than any explanation of it can be. The second thing that makes it a little bit more difficult than just the substance approach is that it is constantly changing. So in the moment that you start speaking about something, it has already changed from when you started speaking. Okay, so how do I say anything valid about this flux that is constantly moving? And we'll get to the solutions in the weeks to come, but it's kind of just preempting you on the complexities of this way of approaching reality. And then the final complexity that I've kind of realized in this approach is most of the mechanistic kind of questions we ask of reality is unconcerned about the future. They just want to know who and what you are now. They're not really interested in bringing the complexities of possibilities into the mix, because that makes it even more unpredictable, because possibilities by their very nature opens up choice. And this is something that process philosophy does beautifully. It basically says, if we have to look at everything that's real, we end up with these, the two things that are most real about our reality is what is and what could be. And there's a constant movement between what is and what could be. And we see that there's a pattern in it. Not everything's possible. This realm of possibility has a structure to it, and it has a limitation to it. And that's why we have new forms of beauty, new forms of order, new forms of life, new forms of consciousness developing, because this order of possibility, the structure of possibility has got some limitation on it. And how we move from what is actual to what is possible, the best way of explaining it is to start with what is actual, rather than what is possible. Now, to again give the implication of this, is many people would think it is absolutely natural to explain a falling apple with the theory of gravity. And many people explain that today very well. Whitehead kind of had this approach to philosophy that says it's the concrete that explains the abstract. In other words, it's the falling apple that explains the theory of gravity, and not the theory of gravity that explains the falling apple. Now, it took me a while to wrap my mind around that, but this brings us back to where we should begin with our inquiry into reality is in the most concrete elements of our experience. And it's inevitable that we're going to move towards more abstract ideas as we move along with this, because abstract ideas makes novelty possible, but it also makes error possible, because it relies on interpretation, and interpretation opens the possibility for misinterpretation. So novelty and error are inevitably linked. You have nothing new or novel without risking error. What a beautiful adventure. And so as we're going to carry on into this exploration of how our world can become more intelligible for us, for the purpose of increasing our experience and appreciation of it, that is the route we're going to take. We begin with the most concrete elements in our experience, then we move towards developing some more abstract ideas of what that means. But then we bring it back to our concrete experience to say, can these ideas be verified in actual experience before we take it further? So yeah, that's kind of another step. That's the next step we're going to move into in this whole approach. Hey, Robert.
Yeah, really, as I've been thinking about this whole process philosophy over the last few years, after you introduced it to us, it's been interesting. And as a person who grew up in the Christian faith, or some version thereof, it's been interesting for me as I've learned more and more from, quote, non-traditional or non-Christians. And back when I was, immersed in the faith and the church and all that stuff, I completely discounted anything that didn't come from a Christian, didn't have the Christian label on it. And what I'm realizing now, and Jenny and I both have been learning from so many different people that are definitely from a non-traditional Christian background. And I was listening to one podcast the other day, and he was just commenting about the and use the word God, but they use so much language that's approachable for non-church people, and yet I have a hard time recommending these podcasts to my Christian friends because they can be so far out there, and and some of the language they use would be very offensive if said in a church setting. But one comment this guy made was, and he was talking about this. He was talking about not using the word process philosophy, but kind of the life force that holds everything together and empowers everything. And then he just made this passing comment that that it's the power of the God who lives in us, through us, and as us.
Mm. Love
And I
it.
just love that. And you know, it was
Resonated.
it really resonated with me, yeah. And I love experiencing kind of the bigness of creation. God's always spoken to me through creation outside, and whether I'm sitting at the edge of the Grand Canyon. I had a project at the Grand Canyon, so I'd go out there for a couple of months, and it was so great because you just after my meetings in these ugly government buildings, I could go out actually to the Grand Canyon and spend the evening there, as the sun was going down, and just the largeness was amazing. Then I would also sometimes go. We lived in the country and built a tree house for our kids, and after they quit going into the tree house, I put a chair up there, and I would go up there and have do my kind of meditation time, and sometimes just the tiniest little spider or the tiniest little insect would be crawling on the arm of my chair or on the rail of the treehouse, and I would just experience God's majesty and beauty and creativity in this the tiniest little insect that and then the breeze would come through and rustle the leaves, and it was just a very immersive experience that was both physical and spiritual back then when I was thinking in the dualistic way, but it really melded them together. And so
Possibilities,
yeah, and the possibilities. So anyway, you've helped me a lot to have the freedom to explore these thoughts outside of, and especially outside of the certainty that's kind of required by certain faith traditions. So thank you.
Wow, beautiful.
So-
Love.
Kelly.
We can't hear you yet.
You got to unmute.
Okay.
There we go.
I've got like just whirling. So from my uneducated little mind or huge mind, there's a few things like I heard in different contexts and different places. One thing, I was watching a movie this week, and it really hit me that all history, they said in this, all history is in this moment. So that would apply to what you're saying, correct? That all history just in this moment is where all history has come together to form this moment.
Yeah.
And then of course, it's moved. I mean, it's gone in a second, it's gone in a minute. I thought, so I'm going to throw out a few of the things that are just scrambling in my brain, and then you can tie them all together. And so that, and then I loved, who was I can't remember the name of the guy, the videos, Andrew Davis, how to process this, like the difference between, as you're saying, life is always a movement, like a river, and then the rock. So it's like you can't step in the river at the same time. You can't step in the
same river.
It will never be the same river ever if you step into the river.
Yeah.
So I would love for you to explain a little more on that. And then of course the rock is, our substance philosophy versus, which, it's funny because they called Jesus the rock, but the Holy Spirit the river. So is it both and, instead of either or? I don't know. So then keep that thought. And then my other thought is coming from a different place. Was it Thich Nhat Hanh? So he gives the example of a book and how when you look at the book, it's a substance, but you have to look at the relationships that made that book, the bookmaker, the people who processed the papers, the trees it came from, the sunshine, the roots, the tree, that even though you're holding the substance, it is made from relationships.
Yes. Yes.
So I know there's something deeper, but I need more word pictures
That's so good.
kind of bring it, to
Yeah.
bring it all to, I know that was a lot, but that's the three things that were coming up as you were talking.
Yes. Yeah.
That has hit me this week
Yes.
in my examples of my life.
Beautiful. So let's start with that. All of history, is in this moment. Because very often we refer to the past as something that's just gone, and therefore it doesn't matter. It doesn't exist anymore. But what the approach of this approach says, actually all of history is present. So let me think of a picture. If you can think of your 6-year-old self, kind of imagine, maybe it's a different age, but if you can think of, a young period in your life, kind of just think back of that year, that period, and try and enter into the feeling, the experience of that 6 or 7-year-old person. There's a sense in which that young child is still present. We can appreciate that although that history has come and gone, it has now taken on a different form. It is still actual. It still exists. That 6-year-old child is still creative of who you are today. I mean, for me, that is just a most beautiful thought, that your 6-year-old self, although it's in the past, is not completely passed away. Now, again, Whitehead kind of used very definite technical language to try and work out and give us language of how can we understand what part of that event is still real and what part has passed away. So I'm going to try and do that now. Such good questions. Now, the part that has passed away is the subjective process of becoming. When you were a 6-year-old, you had a process of becoming, and therefore an experience, a conscious experience, a subjective experience, that although you can remember it now, you cannot fully enter into that process again, because you have experienced so much since then that you cannot re-enter the naivety of that 6-year-old. You cannot unknow what you already know. So that process of becoming, that subjective experience, has passed away. But this is the beauty of what he says. In the moment that that process passed away, it became something different. And he uses the words, an immortal source. He uses the word immortal object. I'm going to tell you what I interpret it as, which he explains later. That 6-year-old has become an immortal source of creativity for who you are today. That 6-year-old can never fully pass away, and it is never just an inactive memory. It is a source of creativity forever. So maybe let me try and give another picture of how this becomes very real. Oh, we're 6 o'clock already, but I'm going to give us one more example before. This is too exciting to leave it here. But if you think of, say, you just had a meal, and I come to you and I say, so how was that meal? And you focus in on the experience of that meal, and you can say, oh, that was fantastic, or, oh, it was okay, but it was satisfying. Your focus is on that experience, and it might have been a significant experience, like every meal is for me. I love my food. Or it might have been a trivial experience, just another meal. Then somebody might ask you, well, how was your day? Now you expand your awareness to something that includes more than just that meal. It includes a number of processes and experience that you kind of summarize into a unity of feeling. That this day was like this. It was something. Or I can ask you, tell me how you feel about your life. And suddenly your awareness expands beyond the meal, beyond the day. It includes those, and however trivial the meal was, it contributes something to your feeling of the whole. And even in your experience of the trivial meal, the entirety of your life has contributed something to how you experience that meal. And so maybe this is a picture. If you throw a stone into a lake and you see the ripples, we can think of existence as that rippling effect, that events includes other events. And who you are, your reality is something that includes other processes. Now, my 6-year-old process might have changed form, but it is still part of a larger process of who I am. And in that larger process, it is still living. It's still contributing something. I'm going to end with this, because as I was thinking through this approach to reality, I had an experience that was very difficult to put in words, but the Lord just suddenly reminded me of I think it's Matthew 17, where Jesus goes onto the high mountain, and the Mount of Transfiguration. And for me, that experience felt like this transformative experience. And the symbolism in the story is this high mountain. It's a elevated, a transformative experience that Jesus had there. And why is it transformative? Because on this mountain, the way in which we normally perceive time changes. Because in our mechanistic way of understanding time, Moses is dead. And Elijah is, you know, the symbol of the prophet that must still come. You know, in this elevated, this transformative experience, Moses, who is past and dead, is alive and speaking. And Elijah, that must still come, you know, he represents the future. He's also there in that moment. And I suddenly had this epiphany of God leading us into an experience of reality that is not limited by these mechanistic ways of understanding time, that there is a connection with what was and with what is that can be transformative of this moment. And for me, that is such a beautiful insight of this approach to reality, that reality is more than this moment. Reality is an accumulation of value and a drawing towards beauty that finds a perspective in this moment that is so unique, that has never been before. And that makes your life in this moment something of exquisite beauty and creativity. And so it leads us into this deep, deep appreciation and reverence for the process, for this creative advance in which we're drawn forward constantly. And sorry, I went over time, but we must pick up on your other two questions next week. Not next week, in 2 weeks' time. We'll continue with that. I saw Rudy left a beautiful comment there as well. Hi, Rudy. Michelle, good to see you guys are on. But thank you. Is there any last comment, or shall we say goodbye? You're welcome to have a last comment.
Can you do it?
I did.
Oh, can I say something real quick? It just made me think, what you just said made me think about, I've been going through boxes of old things that I've had for years, and scrapbooks and letters and things. And I found this letter from my dad that he wrote to me like when I was 23 or 4, when I had broken up with a guy and I'd said he's not a strong enough Christian. And he had all this wisdom that completely was in line with what I'm thinking now. And I never thought of him as that spiritual.
Wow.
In certain ways, but he was saying, you know, God is in, Christ isn't, he was using the word Christ. Christ isn't everyone. And so don't limit yourself. Don't think that just when you see someone, you know exactly where they are, who they are. And I mean, I could share more later, but it was just beautiful how that letter that had been written 40 years ago, you know, is just had this whole new meaning. And it was all probably happening all along, that relationship with my dad, that I didn't realize the depth of what he was pouring into me. So
here you are in this moment, appreciating the value of that right here. And I was also thinking as we were going along of just the beautiful, I think it was David Bohm who speaks of, you know, this folding and unfolding and the implicit and explicit order, and how, you know, what we see, like even in a cloud in the sky, what have you, that what meets our eyes is almost like this bursting into this moment, this drop of experience, this that what we see is captured in our eyes, but it's part of this living whole and process that's suddenly bursting into a particular thing,
example.
You can't even say thing, you know, in a sense, but how beautifully connected it all is. And just makes me think also of looking at all the faces and how this interrelatedness between
Yes.
us, that there's just this beautiful connection, and that goes way beyond what we are even aware of.
Yeah. God
Thanks, Lord.
unfolding
Yes.
in such beautiful variety.
An expression.
Wow. Yeah.
I just wanted to jump in. I've had to be quiet because of things going on here, but I just wanted to say thank you. And yeah, it's Mimi. It's Mimi. Hi. I am so, this is such living water to be able to ponder and discuss so expansively and openly and intelligently what is, and to explore and to explore openly without fear, and to just, I love it. There's only a couple little pockets that I know of where people who love God, who love Jesus, are openly just exploring, and I absolutely love it. I just wanted to say thank you. So
sounds like the nature of a lot.
Thank you, Mimi. So appreciate it. Bless you, friends. And
Thank you.
Have a beautiful day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.